Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Patrice Presco, the Associate Director of Learning Design at the Teaching and Learning Lab at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And on behalf of the Women in STEM Cooperative at the University at Buffalo, welcome to our online series about expanding the participation of women in undergraduate STEM education. Today's focus is new adult learning pathways at the community college level. So a little bit about us. This is the third year that we've been running this forum, so we're really excited about that. And the Women in STEM Cooperative consists of a group of volunteers who are dedicated to advancing women in STEM in our respective communities at the University at Buffalo and Harvard University. This series is our attempt to address some of the systemic challenges and opportunities with improving student STEM success. Before we invite today's distinguished guests to get started, we would like to take this moment to welcome all of our guests today. We have over 140 of your colleagues representing 56 institutions of higher ed, 8 organizations, and from 4 countries, 1 territory, and 25 states. All have registered for this series over the last 3 years, and please feel free to share the information. We do have some upcoming sessions in November and January and February and March. So in addition to sharing out knowledge, one of our goals for this series is to provide a space where you can interact with one another. So we do have some interactivity planned for all of you today. And we would like you also to take that opportunity. You can share in the chat box if you want to take some time to introduce yourself and share a challenge or something that you're interested in talking about. And we hope that this will be a very active discussion, and we encourage you to participate. So today we have joining with us Bilge Abgis, who is a research associate and program director at the Center for Women in Government and Civil Society at the Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policies at the University at Albany, and I am a proud University of Albany alumni, so I'm really excited about this. And we have Gina Refke, who is the executive director, Center for Women in Government and Civil Society, and clinical assistant professor, the Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policies at the University at Albany. And then we are lucky to have Ashley Stenzel with us, who is a PhD student at the Cancer Sciences at Roswell Park at the University at Buffalo. And she will be sharing a story with us today. So just to give you a little overview of the agenda for today, we'll start with Ashley, who's going to share a little bit about her experiences. And then we have a little bit of interactivity planned, and then we will hear from Bilge and Dina, and then we will have some time for question and answers. So Ashley, if you want to share your story next, we can get started with that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about my story, which was a little bit of a rocky path going through my education experience. And I started with, when I was 17 years old, I learned I was going to be a mother. So I was a pregnant teenager. And it was really hard for me to imagine going on to college and trying to get some type of higher education, knowing that it was going to be very challenging. So I heard a lot about the statistics. And to give you an idea, a little less than 2% of teenage mothers will go on to get their college degree by the age of 30. And I'm a very statistics-driven person, so that was very scary for me to hear that before I started my college experience. But I grew up with a single mom who was a really strong role model, and she ended up going to get her 4-year degree when I was in high school. So I was able to see a struggle before and after her college education, which to me was very eye-opening of how much opportunity a college degree can bring somebody. So even though I was faced with this new challenge in my life at a really young age, I knew that I wanted to at least try to get my college degree. So I ended up deciding that for me it would be the easiest if I started out by going to community college. And the reason I chose to go to community college was because it was, first of all, less expensive, but also it was close to home. So it was easier for me to learn how to be a new parent, and I had to work to help support my new child. And then I also had to take on these new college classes. So community college was a really great way for me to kind of just ease into that college setting. When I was in community college, I found that it was a really good beginning to college experience, because community college is set up to really, I think, help people be successful who have outside commitments, because I was able to take most of my classes at night, which meant that I was able to care for my daughter and work shifts during the day. I felt like it gave me a good start to success, but then I transferred into a 4-year degree program, and that's when I started to see the real challenges that were quite shocking to me. And when I transferred from community college into a 4-year degree program, I knew that I had an interest in science, and I was going for a basic science degree, but it was shocking to me to find that there were no evening science classes or anything that was accommodating to somebody who has extracurricular commitments. So I had to take all-day classes, which added a new hardship into my life, because I now also, with financial aid requirements, had to take classes full-time. I had to work enough hours to be able to support my daughter, and then I also had to take care of my daughter. So I had all of these new obstacles that I was facing in my undergraduate education. And my class schedule in my 4-year program went from about 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. for my classes. And because I was used to trying to work my work schedule around that during the day when I was taking night classes, it was very challenging for me now to try to come into this 4-year program and be able to still meet all of my commitments, and there weren't really enough hours in the day. So what ended up happening is I would end up going to school from like 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. and then I would work a night shift job from about 5 to 5:30 p.m. until like 2:30 a.m. and then I would drive home and get home around 3:30 a.m. and then have to wake up around 6 or 6:30 to start it all over again the next day. So it was really incredibly difficult. I started to see and understand why so few mothers who have children at a young age are able to get a college degree. And so I felt like I could really now fully understand where those statistics were coming from. I was able to complete my 4-year degree, and it was really difficult, and I don't think I necessarily performed to my full ability during that time because of all of the different obstacles I was facing. However, I managed to get that degree, and I decided to go on to get my master's right after I finished my bachelor degree. And when I entered a master's program, I here discovered that I was able to start with like a clean slate. A master's program I felt was much more friendly to students who come from different challenging backgrounds, because I now was able to work full-time during the day with a job I was able to get with my bachelor degree. And then I was able to take evening classes and weekend classes to get my master's degree. And so it was here that I really felt like I became really successful, and my GPA was great, much better than I experienced with my undergraduate degree. And doing my master's ended up giving me the confidence that I lacked in my undergraduate years to believe in myself enough to apply to my PhD program that I'm in now. And so I moved here to do the PhD program at the University at Buffalo. And I've definitely experienced a lot of challenges in my time here doing a PhD, because a PhD is very difficult, but I still today will say that nothing even compares to how challenging it was to get an undergraduate degree when you're coming from that really disadvantaged background, and disadvantaged on multiple levels, financially, with all of the new responsibilities I was experiencing in my life. That was an experience that nothing has compared to date. So I think that there are a lot of different components that made my experience in my undergraduate years so challenging. And some of these included the fact that I was a new mother, so I was trying to learn how to take care of a baby when I still felt like I was just a kid myself. So that was very challenging. These bizarre hours I had to work to accommodate a school schedule, and knowing that I wanted to continue on in STEM, but really struggling to figure out how to make that work when I wasn't what somebody might consider a stereotypical traditional college student. And the class load requirement by financial aid definitely made things more challenging. I think that if I had been able to kind of stretch things out a little bit more and take fewer classes at once, I would have been more successful in my undergrad. But also I think that there were a few professors in my undergrad that I remember just being really supportive and amazing. But I would say the majority of my undergraduate professors were expecting their students to really not have a lot of commitments outside of their undergraduate education. And I think that as things have been changing in our society today, things with new expenses in education and things like that, more and more students are having to have these extracurricular commitments that are making it really difficult. But also the lack of flexibility in a basic science program was really challenging for me as well. And so I went actually to a smaller undergraduate university, so I knew pretty much all of my peers that I graduated with. And I would say that out of all of my peers, I didn't really know many students, if any, that actually had to work outside of their bachelor degree. So they were mostly being able to focus on their classes. I was the only mother in my program, so that was very difficult, and it makes it feel very isolating. And I really felt like I entered a 4-year degree program after experiencing that things were easier in a community college, and then I entered a 4-year degree program where I felt like it almost felt like I was set up for failure. And that might not have actually been the case, but it definitely felt like it was with the way the whole system was set up. So kind of given all of these different things, I definitely think that a bachelor degree for a student who's coming from a different background is the most difficult part of getting an education. And I wish that when I was a student, there was more messaging to explain that it gets easier, because I wonder if that's why less students pursue a graduate degree who come from a difficult background. But that's pretty much my story.
Oh, thanks so much, Ashley. Appreciate that. And I think you brought up a lot of really important points about the support that's needed, and especially the flexibility. And I know having to carry a full load for financial aid continues to be a problem, right? Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. And then we will have some time for Q&A at the end in case any of the participants have any questions. And I also, if anybody wants to put any questions in the chat box, feel free to do that as well. So what we had planned next, we are going to put everyone into a breakout room for just a few minutes, so that you can talk a little bit about, Ashley just shared a lot of barriers that she faced when she was, pursuing her degree. And we would love to have you just spend a little bit of time getting to know some other participants and talking about what barriers, if any, you have experienced pursuing a career that is non-traditional for your gender. So for those of you that are not familiar with Zoom, I'm going to turn on the breakout room, and it will automatically put you in a breakout room, and you just have to accept to go in there. And then the people in the breakout room can have a private conversation. We'll do maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and then we will bring everyone back for the next part of our presentation. Okay, I see some of you are back from the breakout rooms. Everyone else should be back in about 30 seconds, and then we will get started with the next part of our webinar.
Right, it would have been.
Oh, okay, I think everyone is back now.
Yep, here we go.
Yeah, so before we move on, if anyone would like to share some takeaways or anything that came out of your discussion, feel free to turn your microphone on and share a little bit with us, or you can type something into the chat box.
So Patrice, I'll share a little bit. So my background, this is Robin Sullivan. I'm from the University of Buffalo, and I'm currently an educational technology librarian. My early career path for many, many years was instructional design. So since I am just very loosely in the STEM fields, I think I've experienced less barriers than others. I think when you have the heavy sciences, it's much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
That was what I shared.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting the number of women who are in ed tech and learning design that actually started either in engineering and sciences. And the story I hear from a lot of women is because of the experiences that they had as a woman in those fields, they've gone into education because they want to create better experiences for the next generation of women. Okay, great, thank you. So we will move on next to Bilge and Dina, and they will share a little bit about some of the work and research that they've been doing, and then we will have some time for Q&A.
Excellent, great. Thank you, Patrice. We have a PowerPoint. Are we able to share it with you all, or if not, we can? Oh, we can't hear you.
If you go down to where it says share, you should be able to share it.
Thank you. Okay, excellent. Okay, so everyone, welcome. I'm Bilge, as Patrice has introduced. I'm with the Center for Women in Government, and I'm here with Dina Rafi, who's the Executive Director of our center. We are a part of the University at Albany Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy. The connection to women in STEM for us is, of course, as it stands in the name, the Center for Women in Government and Civil Society. We're very much interested in all aspects of women in the communities. We particularly have been working with the New York State Education Department on non-traditional employment training program. If you like, Dina, maybe a couple of minutes of introduction to our project.
Sure. So this is a long-standing program where we work with community colleges across New York State to help them provide technical assistance to them in terms of recruiting and retaining women and men to gender non-traditional careers. And these are occupations that are less than 25% of either gender. So we have a list of these occupations, a list of these jobs, and we work with community colleges in particular to identify the barriers that they face, whether in the climate of the college or in serving particular populations that are special populations, like Ashley, who was a caregiver, and the system is not set up to serve her. It's not set up to address her needs. And we do a bit of research for them on accumulating case studies of successful practices that would help them not only recruit, but once they get them into the institutions, know how to retain them and how to pave the way to success. So we always say this is a very proactive and deliberate process. And if it is not, then people are left to fall through the cracks. Obviously, Ashley is very resilient, and we are very impressed with her case. But a lot of students are not able to really withstand the isolation and the pressures of a system that is set up for very traditional, stereotypically traditional students who are not the only one in the classroom, or are, do not have the time pressures and the time poverty that women who are mothers or caregivers have.
Thank you, Dina. So today we'll talk about women in STEM in the context of community colleges, but we've decided to first start with an overview of women in STEM. Very basically, we'll go over how the higher education is doing, and how are the occupations are really being occupied by women or not in STEM. And now we'll talk a little bit about the community colleges. As Dina has mentioned, we have been extensively working with New York State community colleges on barriers there are for gender non-traditional students, specifically women in STEM has been a part of a large portion of our work. We're also going to talk about institutional best practices. This is coming out of a case study that we have done with the highest performing community colleges in New York State in terms of recruiting and retaining non-traditional students for their gender, a majority of whom are women in STEM. And then we'll also talk a little bit about Vanguard awardees. And if you're not familiar with them, we'll resolve the mystery for you in a second. So women in STEM, why does it matter? We know that it of course matters, but then it's a matter of economic development. It's a matter of global competitiveness. It's a matter of economic justice. It's a matter of gender equity. Of course, that the longer we are away from parity in any economic avenue, the farther away we are from economic justice, as wealth has been accumulating in one sex or the other. And then gender equity, economic power is any kind of right, it is the protection of any kind of right. So violation of access to equal access is also problematic for our societies, and obviously the most efficient and effective way of using our human capital and resources is to make sure that gender does not play any role in making economic decisions. So right now, very quickly, looking at women in STEM occupations based on the federal 2018 data, we do see closer to parity in life, physical, and social sciences if they are paired together. But then if you look at the computer and mathematical occupations, you'll see that it's only 25.6%. Architecture and engineering is even lower. Although we've just selected a few of the sample of the occupations that might give you some idea regarding which these titles are really referring to in terms of occupations. The reason why we highlighted in blue the computer programmers or software developers is that we do see that the computer sciences are even lower in terms of the women in STEM. Although, of course, in civil engineering, for instance, or engineering, there are lower numbers. The reason why this is important is that 10 out of the 7 largest STEM occupations are computer-based and computer-related. So the low numbers that we see for women's representation in these occupations is really skewing the data so much that it really they're very impactful occupations where if we're looking at the women in STEM. So if you look at quickly at the projections provided by the federal government, then we can also see that the STEM occupations are expected to grow even further in 2028. And the average occupations in the US are expected to grow just a little bit higher than 5%, while almost 9% of the growth is expected in the STEM occupations. And look at that median annual wage in 2018. The disparity is stark. This is completely talking about the economic justice. This is coming back to the gender equity issue. If the women are not accessing these occupations in the same rates as men, then there's definite embedded inequality built into the system of our community here. So if you're talking about the economic well-being or encouraging people, women to pursue STEM, then there's no way of getting around without discussing the topic of leaky pipeline to STEM faculty. The reason why this is important is that the percentage of women pursuing PhD in STEM drops substantially across fields in comparison to masters. Now have a look at, quick look at this table. Look at the second and the third column, masters and PhD. There is consistent drop in almost in all of these fields that are included here when it comes to PhD. Why does this matter, especially in the context of higher education? Because if the faculty positions are going to be the ones that will be if the faculty is going to be the role model for our students, if we are really trying to encourage women in STEM to pursue these fields, if there's lack of representation, then how is this really going to work, right? If you can't see it, how are you going to become one? So for that reason, we wanted to highlight that there's a leaky pipeline in terms of the higher education, advanced degrees, and becoming faculty, which is something that that needs to be talked about even further. Moving on, we also wanted to make sure that we're talking about the fact that we cannot assume that women are monolithic. Women of color is only one aspect, a very important aspect of the intersection that the women are sitting in. Just like Ashley has mentioned, a wonderful example of being a woman who is also a mother, a young mother, has also been another layer of intersection that she had experienced, right? So when it comes to such intersections, we cannot paint all women in with one brush. Women of color and in STEM are specifically also very important to discuss, because whenever we're talking about women of color in higher education or women in STEM, these do not necessarily coincide. For some reason, there's a lack of research when it comes to women of color in STEM. So we're encouraging everyone to think twice about, consider more research ideas, or consider this as a very important topic to think about, to look at. When we look at all higher education degrees, you do see that we've included only a few of the races and ethnicities. We do realize there is more, but just a few highlights that you can see that they do differ. When you're looking at the Hispanic and Asian and Black communities, their access to higher education, whether it's associate's degree of community colleges or bachelor's or higher degrees, then you'll see that these rates are dropping dramatically for women of color, because the literature says that there's a lot more challenges that they're facing that we're not really talking about, because there is not much of a focus on them. There is the intersection of the race and ethnicity and gender that needs to be taken into account. We would like to move on now very quickly onto the barriers for women in STEM. So these barriers are coming out of our research, our work with the community colleges that we've been working with through our work for State Department of Education. Barriers for women in STEM are institutional barriers and gendered curriculum. So Ashley has spoken to some of the institutional barriers, like the financial aid system and or inflexible class hours. There's also a chilly classroom and unconscious bias, which could be experienced by women in STEM specifically. And this particular one becomes even worse for women of color. That's another crucial point. The women do not have access to hands-on experiences. A lot of the times we do hear from women who are avoiding careers in STEM is that they did not have a hands-on experience, and the literature suggests that women are more likelier to pursue a field if they did have a hands-on experience, but then the society is really discouraging them from getting these hands-on experiences due to gendered norms within the society. What a man can do, what a woman can do is right in their face. Lack of focus on women of color in STEM, as we have just mentioned, lack of role models, especially within STEM faculty. This is talking back to the point that we were making earlier regarding the leaky pipeline, why it is so important. Well, if family support is also another very crucial point. Classmates and peers do contribute or help easing the chilly classroom and unconscious bias that might be in the classroom. So they're crucial allies if we're trying to engage women in STEM and we're trying to retain them and have them graduate from these degrees. Also, gender norms within the society, what is acceptable to a woman or a man, to be a woman or a man is also another part of the undeniable part of this issue. As Dina has mentioned, we continuously remind our partners in the community colleges that this is an effort that takes whole state, whole country, whole world. We do realize this is such a challenging topic, the fact that there are gender norms within societies, but just realizing them and then working towards them as a group in tiny bits does help. We do see the differences. And another important barrier is for women who are contemplating pursuing a career in STEM is access to career path information. If a person is meeting with a counselor, career counselor, and who has maybe unconscious bias regarding what they might do based on their gender and or how they might look, then this is really immediately taken away. A lot of information there might be there. There's a tremendous research that shows that once a person sees a pathway towards what the career might look like or what kind of careers there might be, then they are much likelier to pursue a career, even though they might not feel fully confident that they can accomplish it. Once you place a seed of vision, what this might look like, they're much likelier to pursue the field. So this is another important point when it comes to women in STEM, especially in the face that there is lack of role models, there's not enough of them, to mentor. There's also another barrier, self-confidence of the student, which can be supported or diminished through many connections that they might be making with higher education institutions or within their family or within their communities. Another very important barrier is impact of the media. So if recruiting for the women in STEM, if recruiting for STEM programs, a higher education institution is utilizing a lot of male pictures, that will make a difference. If they're using women picture, but then they're not inclusive of different races and ethnicities, then it might also hinder. If they're only including women of color and white women and also men, but not inclusive of mothers, then it might still not work. So being very mindful is also a very crucial part of what kind of a messaging we're sending to our potential students. As a part of our case study that we have completed in 2016, which we're very happy to share with you that we're going to be repeating this year as well, is institutional best practices for women in STEM. Specifically, these are the outcomes of the community colleges that we worked for. But then looking at the literature, and as you go through these, you'll see that these are making sense for a lot of the higher education institutions. Yet for community colleges, they might become easier to manage because they have very close relationships with their students. They can really make it for their students much easier to stay in the field. I'm going to refer back to Ashley's example, how supported she was, and then how incredibly hard she worked to make that opportunity really count, and then push her towards towards the 4-year degree. Granted that there was even further challenges awaiting for her there, but then she got definitely support. So starting early is very important. We've been talking with our partners and their partners in the high school level that starting early is important. They want to get to the children, women, as early as possible to convince them to have them picture themselves, imagine themselves as scientists, mathematicians, engineers. Promoting diversity and inclusion is incredibly important. Any kind of, even the smallest media material should be done with some care and thoughtfulness embedded into it. Mentoring programs are incredibly helpful to the students and any staff who's involved in the mentoring programs or peer mentoring programs. The students should be given also an access to training regarding unconscious bias related to gender, race, ethnicity, and any other intersections our potential students in STEM might be coming from. Showcasing student success and other role models, we have a wonderful example of that in a second that we'll share with you, is also very crucial, and it's shown to be very, very impactful, promoting the benefits of STEM occupations, such as wages, and potential job variety at the end is also very important. I missed one point, which I'm going to come back with because it's very relevant right now. Financial assistance, tutoring, childcare, and job placements. These are also very crucial. We have worked with our community colleges. There are many who will provide childcare services for their students. Most of them are women who will benefit from these. And flexibility with financial programming has also been very impactful. Tutoring as well for the students to feel for them to build their self-confidence, as well as feeling competent, so that they could see themselves that they can really accomplish in this field. Face-to-face peer counseling has also proven to be very impactful. Spending time with your students, making sure that you hear their challenges, and then providing them with information that's available in your institution or somewhere within the community that might help them to come over some hurdles so that they can stay in their field, continue their education, has also been very helpful to our partners in New York State. Training teachers, faculty, staff, as I mentioned before, on unconscious bias is also crucial. Media that is promoting women participation in STEM, orientations, internships, job shadowing, as you can see, as much exposure as possible that you can possibly give to your potential students or current students is very impactful. Ensuring equal education training for both male and female students and employees is also very important. Proactive approach to incidents of sexual harassment is something that definitely needs to be taken in very, very seriously. We do know that a lot of our colleges working towards this. There's improvement, but we still have a lot of ways to go. This needs to be taken also very seriously. Evaluating the curricula and recruitment strategies to de-gender contents. This is coming a little bit back to the media material, but also going back to what is discussed in the classroom. So in an engineering classroom, if the professor is completely unaware of the bias that they might have, and then always referring to a potential engineer as he, the few students, the few female students in the classroom might feel very easily alienated or offended. So inclusive language on all levels is crucial. Partnerships with businesses and community organizations, not only to make sure that the students, especially women in STEM, get experiences hands-on, but also make sure that they do, the business and community organizations are aware that women can do this job. They're well qualified, they're competent, they're hardworking, and the institutions are behind them to support any needs that they might need, is also very crucial. Now, for any efforts, we think that these institutions, our community colleges, have benefited tremendously also from evaluating their efforts, the outcomes of their efforts as well, because what gets evaluated does get done. We'll spend just a couple of minutes on Vanguard Awards. So if you're not familiar with, the Center for Women in Government and Civil Society has been facilitating these statewide awards for some years now. It's a statewide award where we are awarding 8 post-secondary gender non-traditional students from across New York State that are pursuing career technology education programs in the community colleges that are receiving federal Perkins grants. So we asked our Vanguard awardees over the course of years, when we are acknowledging them and then awarding them, we do also interview them individually. This is an extensive interview where we ask them a lot of questions. And then one of the first questions is that the reasons that they are pursuing the field in STEM. There are some highlights that are coming up that we would like to share with you. They're pursuing this field because there is a chance to influence a large portion of the society. There is room to combine various topics of interest, such as math and chemistry in chemical engineering. There is room for creativity. There is room for solving real-life problems. They have a passion for research, discovery, and innovation. They might also have had earlier hands-on experience in the field. This also has come up quite much, that a lot of them have. had this another reason for them to feel close to the STEM field. We also asked them specifically what barriers they had. They said that, well, being one of the few or the only women in the class does become sometimes challenging, because they do also see that they're often underestimated. They're held to a higher standard of work or classroom projects than their male counterparts. They feel like they have to prove that they're just as good or better than the men in the class. They also feel like they have not taken seriously at job sites, in the work environment. They're also thinking that there are societal barriers and gender norms that they're facing continuously. They are also feeling like they're not respected as professionals and/or students. Just one of the quotes that I'm going to go over, a student who was, this is from Megan, who was a 2016 Vanguard awardee, a student who was studying for a Calculus 2 exam had a question. As a math major, I had taken Calculus 1, 2, 3, differential equations, linear algebra, and had done well in all of those classes. He did not acknowledge my answer. My answer was irrelevant. That was one of the first times I had felt a prejudice in the field of mathematics as a woman. So moving on to the successful personal strategies that these students have highlighted, is that they found it very helpful when they focused on the future and when they were able to nurture their own passion. Connections with people who understand what type of difficulties in their field as a woman was also very helpful to them. Family support was very important if it was available. They were working very, very hard. They also were trying to gain hands-on experience. They also mentioned that being institutionally acknowledged for success benchmarks was also very impactful for them to nurture their passion and continue to be motivated to stay in the program. If they had access to mentors and role models early on, that was also very helpful to them. They also thought that standing up for themselves was very, very helpful, albeit very hard. So I'm just going to share with you one of the quotes. My teacher was very welcoming of my interest in cars. He held a high performance club after school, and I was in attendance every week. He would give me extra work to practice at home. At the end of the year, I ended up graduating top of my class. A male classmate actually came up to me and said, I know they were rough on you in the beginning, but you're the best one here. And you're the only one who knows how to do this work. I've proven to them that, yes, I'm a female in this field. I'm ready to take on this field. As long as you have a love for it, what you're doing is never going to be wrong. This is Cecile from 2017, Automotive Technology. So this is the gist of our presentation. I apologize if we went over a little bit time, but we really wanted to share all of this with you. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in.
That was great. Thank you so much. So if anyone has any questions, you can either type them in the chat box or feel free to turn your microphone off. One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking at the end about some of the challenges was if Ashley had experienced some of those issues. I know, like you mentioned, kind of that, like having to work twice as hard or being held to a higher standard. And I was just wondering, Ashley, if you've experienced that, and if so, like what are some of the strategies you've used to have your voice heard?
Yeah, so definitely in my undergrad, I actually went to an all-women's college. So there wasn't the gender bias you would expect, but I actually, rather than feeling like I was being held to a higher standard, I just felt like I was always behind. So all of my classmates always seemed like they knew so much more than I did, that when I was preparing for an exam and it was, say, in like a class that was graded on a curve, I was just always concerned I was going to be that last person who ended up getting the lower grade.
And so I would like also to add that as institutions, we have a responsibility to really put together mechanisms and infrastructure to support people like Ashley. And I think in Ashley's case, if the institutional infrastructure was there, her time there would have been a lot easier. If there was, for example, a child care assistance, and our Perkins grantees are really can use some of these Perkins funds to provide childcare for people like Ashley. If there was tutoring to help her feel more competent, that would have been really important, because we know from research studies that competency destroys any stereotype threats, or the feeling that you are competent. This can destroy any stereotype threat and can give you the ability to, that self-confidence and that ability to feel, yes, I belong here. I don't care what anybody says. Also, the ability to form a community. We know from research that women have to feel part of a community, because the way we are socialized, relationships are very important to us. So feeling a sense of isolation is really very, very dangerous, and it's a threat for women. So there's an institutional responsibility to try to intentionally build a community of women where they can derive support from each other and feel that they're not isolated. That is really important. Mentorship is very important, so that people like Ashley do not, have to do it the hard way, but can have a much easier transition to four-year colleges from community colleges, and have a better, a clearer pathway on how to make it in that environment. So really, institutions have a responsibility to provide that case management that includes mentoring, tutoring, and building community among women.
Thank you. And a question that there was a question of whether the PowerPoints will be shared.
Oh yes, sure, definitely.
And a question I was wondering about, I know, Ashley mentioned, and I know when I used to teach, I had students that experienced this, financial aid being based on carrying a full-time load. And then, it's very hard to keep up with that load. And I thought you mentioned like flexibility in financial services. And I was wondering if there's any change to that model, or do you see any change to that model that would, better support people in these situations?
We do not see change. That's and that's because institutions are also, have budgetary concerns. So I'm speaking about, many of the institutions in higher education are really competing for, the enrollment of students, and having a share of the students, a higher share of the student market. So we have not seen, a lot of change in how financial aid is provided, and that's why we have a high student debt situation and problem in our country. So it has not changed. People are really struggling to meet those financial needs.
One addition, I absolutely agree. One addition to Dina's point is that there's not much of a change, but there is diversity. So when we're working with our community colleges, consider a college in the middle of Manhattan and compare that to another college in Buffalo, or in the capital region where we are in, or in the North Country. So the experiences and the resources might vary. Not necessarily much better in Manhattan than North Country, but depending on the school's approach, the lives of the students can be changed. And then we did see that as we were working with these institutions, they might sometimes hire counselors specifically for the gender non-traditional students. So they would have a person full-time or part-time specifically working with these students. So although they might not be able to do much with the financial aid system, they might have a person specifically working with the student who has access to a lot of information and then has time and attention to the challenges that specifically, for instance, in our case, women in STEM might be facing, on top of other intersection of the difficulties that they might be facing. So when you have a staff member who has this lens and awareness, if you will, then a lot of the system becomes a little easier to navigate. Yeah, it's very slowly changing. Maybe that's why we're not seeing it. We would like to believe that. But at the least having some support from staff and faculty is very impactful, which doesn't cost much.
And we also know that the Excelsior program that the state had instituted is not being as implemented as we have hoped. We know that it has not made college free, as the state was promising. And we know that there are a lot of issues with implementation. So there's still so much problems in students having financial aid or financial support for their college education.
And Becky, you said you had something you wanted to share?
We can't hear you.
Yeah, that was a little earlier when we were talking about the breakout room. So I'm fine to go forward. I kind of had a question for Ashley, just wondering what she thought would have helped at the bachelor level to make things easier. We may have kind of covered that, but I figured, give her a chance to answer perhaps.
Yeah, so some of the resources you had mentioned, like tutoring and childcare, those were actually available at my university, but they didn't apply necessarily because all of my classes were during the day, and so my significant other was able to schedule his work hours at night so that he could stay home during the day to care for our child while I was in classes. But then the issue was the lack of flexibility in the class schedule if you're pursuing a STEM degree, because I wasn't able to attend any tutor hours because I would be in class all day and then I would have to go make money to care for my child. So I'd have to go work all night, and there was just never the availability to do anything really to support my program. And so it was really a lack of flexibility in the classes itself.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have Roberta or anyone, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, Patrice, on the issue that you brought up about financial aid not being available or very available for part-time. To me, that was like, oh my goodness, that seems to be a very relevant piece that I had never really considered in the past. Are there any studies or that can, that have tried to look at that have looked at students that are going part-time as compared to students that are going full-time and financial aid issues?
I believe that we have seen such studies in terms of the full-time, part-time, and financial aid, but we can check them for you, and then maybe along with our PowerPoint, we can send you some examples of them.
Yeah, and sometimes, the UB Women in STEM group has a small committee that tries to look at grant funding. That might be, it probably is a small amount of literature that's out there right now. But that just seems like a topic that's ripe for exploring.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And do we have any other questions from the audience? Let's see. There's one that says, I agree that flexibility is a huge issue in STEM degrees due to the requirement of completing labs. Are there any models for offering more flexibility for lab-based courses other than offering kitchen chemistry labs, for example?
It really is the whole notion of work-life integration is really lacking when we talk about women in STEM in particular. The model that we have is completely created for the male breadwinner or the male scientist who is not fettered with any home responsibilities. So the idea of the need for work-life integration programs mean that we have to create an infrastructure that allows women to balance whatever responsibilities they have for their socially ascribed responsibilities of caregiving with their identities and their responsibilities as scientists. We do not see that. We are struggling with ad hoc programs, but there isn't a holistic, comprehensive program that acknowledges that this is everyone's problem, not just a women problem. Because we cannot meet the needs of the workforce. We are in a very competitive global environment, and we have to recruit from a wider pool of talent. And we have to recruit from women and from people of color populations, and cannot rely only on a male, the white male pool. You know, when we talk about flexibility, there is a need to just look at the system holistically and not just look at lab hours or flexibility, but how do we create mechanisms and infrastructure that allow the integration of life and work for a different kind of worker or a different kind of scientist, and not just the unfettered scientist that has 100% of his concentration and his life dedicated to science.
This is Robin again. I just want to comment that SUNY had one of their faculty advisory task groups who looked at virtual labs. And it was to kind of address this idea that students, well, actually, I think it was more for initially targeted for online students and how they can get access to the labs. But I think it fits very well with this question. And I was not a big part of that committee, but I know that they put some materials together online. Patrice, was that when you were still with SUNY? And did you hear any of the results of that stuff?
I don't recall any of the results. I know some colleagues at Empire State College were working in a few things, and that one of our upcoming sessions is actually on fully online programs. And so that maybe we should try and find a speaker, you know, someone that could speak to some of, you know, overcoming this problem with labs.
Mm-hmm. And I think Lisa Stevens was involved in that first group that looked at that. So she was somebody that we had talked to about possibly speaking. That might be a good thing for her to address.
Definitely, that's a good idea. And then the second question that we had, since we're just a small group, maybe we could just discuss it, is what advice do you give female students who would like to pursue this career and might be reluctant because of the voices around them telling them this is not a woman's job? And Ashley, just based on, you know, your story and experiences, I was wondering if you have had the opportunity to be a mentor or role model, or had other, you know, other peers come to you for that kind of advice.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, while I didn't experience gender bias or anything of that sort in my undergrad, it's definitely something I've noticed in my master's, in my PhD, and also in the workplace. And so I have actually right now, as a senior PhD student, have had the opportunity to mentor some of the newer students, some of our undergrad interns, and some high school students that come and do rotations in our lab. And that's been a really great experience, and actually all of them have happened to be women.
Oh. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share a story of advice that they have given, or advice that you'd like to share with our broader audience?
I think the advice that I always fall back on is try to be as competent as you can be. Try to be very, very competent in what you do and know your business, because that is proven empirically to be, again, to destroy any threats that comes from a gendered climate or from um, uh, a, um, a chilly climate. And really, again, if you can't, if you're facing difficulty, look for tutoring, look for, mentoring, but try to be as competent as you can. Yes, we know that we have to work harder and we have to prove ourselves, unfortunately. But the way you prove yourself is when you are competent and prove that you belong there.
I think kind of to that point also is being willing to volunteer for extra experiences. And so that's something that made me more confident, is doing outreach, science outreach in the community, being able to go out and speak to youth. Doing things like that has made me feel more confident in my ability to speak about science.
And we hosted, this is Becky Burke, we hosted some international folks who were faculty or staff, and they were trying to find out what was working in women in STEM programs. And as part of the conversation, we brought up that how men and women think about different things can be very, have a wide gap. Whereas a man will slough something off and think, oh, that really wasn't that big a deal. A woman will get very, very upset and think that she's not as competent. So I think part of that is that you have to have the mindset that you are as good as the next person and that you really do have something to contribute. So yeah, I think competence is a great start, but you also have to have the confidence that you do belong there.
And I just added a link to a video into the chat. This is a video that just talks briefly about the growth mindset theory by Carol Dweck, and how, a lot of the misconceptions are, oh, I'm a girl, I can't do math, or even, just on general principles, I'm not good at this. So growth mindset says that if you try hard enough, you can become good at anything. So that's just one little piece of advice to share with other women.
Right, and I think, again, institutions have responsibility to recruit students, and as Bill Gates pointed out, starting early, but also creating that channels for that growth mindset to flourish among women, because we know that women are facing a lot of pressures from popular culture, from the media, from society, from the entertainment industry, that tells them that they have a particular role in society, and they're not going to be feminine enough or women enough if they did certain things or pursued construction or so it's very important to do the outreach to women, create retreats, create career days, create community forums where women can come and experience what it means to be a scientist. Because we know, again, Bill Gates referred to that, we know from studies that women need to feel that they are going to be successful in whatever they pursue. So when providing that opportunity for women to have hands-on experience of what it entails if I enter this field is very important, because women are more risk-averse than men because of how we're socialized, not because of biology, but of how we're socialized. So creating opportunities for women to address that risk aversion that they have by being participating in activities that gives them an overview of what it means to be an engineer, or what it means to be a scientist, is going to be very important.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know I find that when I talk to women, they don't really realize like the wide range of opportunities that are available to them. And I know that like I feel like every time I meet women in STEM, especially now that like I'm in Boston and there's so many startups, like people are doing such just really interesting, fascinating work. And a wondering that I've had for a long time is like, how do we share out those stories? And especially, you were mentioning like enabling young women to have these experiences and role models, but a lot of women don't have access to these programs. And I just keep thinking about like, how can we use technology in some way to share out these stories and really, let women know about the role models that are out there for them. And like I said, just all the different things that you can do with a STEM degree.
Right. I think that it is happening in many communities, but it's not happening again as a comprehensive approach. In many communities, in many civil society organizations like Girls Inc. or other girls-oriented organizations are trying to bring STEM role models to the girls and to these spaces and say, you too can be a scientist, you too can be an engineer. It's such a cool thing. It's important to target middle school and high school because that's when the interest erodes. And the earlier you start, the better. It's a cultural problem. And we all have a responsibility to address it and to bring it. But using technology to bring it to the girls and to women in many spaces is a great idea, but it's got to be done, comprehensively. And I know at the federal level there is for a very long time, since a decade ago or maybe 2 decades ago, they understood that we have a problem because we cannot really keep recruiting from white male sources only. And we have to really widen the pool of talent here to meet the demands of the workforce. And so we really hope that there be a more comprehensive approach starting in the public schools and as early as possible. It's happening in many places.
Yeah, and then just one other thing I would add, and then we can see if anyone else has any other questions. The topic that we covered last year in this series, a lot of the theme was really around sexual harassment and the issues around that women face both in school and in once they go out into the field. And that still is a huge, as we all know, challenge and barrier. And for all the work that we do bringing women in, I mean, so many of the stories I hear about why they leave has to do with either a lack of sense of belonging or harassment.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially in some fields like construction that is heavily male dominant and that really is at the heart of stereotypical male masculinity and femininity. You tend to see, a lot of that. And again, we have a responsibility to make these spaces more safe for women, more accessible for women, and we're not there yet. So grievances procedures, trainings and, regulations need to be in place to make women's journey much safer in these spaces.
And going back just to the item we were just talking about as far as sharing stories, I added a link to the UB Women in STEM Collaborative Facebook page. And that page is definitely a place where we advertise events like this. So there's stories that we're sharing with the community and many other opportunities. And it would be great. I don't think, this is a kind of a technical question. If anybody has an answer, they can reply to me off list, but can't seem to find a way to make a Facebook page where the community can contribute without having to be enrolled. So right now our Facebook page is push out. But it would be nice if the community could just add something, but then we can, flip the switch and say, yes, that's proper enough to go out. It seems like you have to be a group member first, which is a stumbling block. So Patrice, if you have any clues there, please contact me.
And I'd like to add, these programs this is Becky Burke, these programs may already exist, but making like a small toolkit of women who are in different professions to give a little video vignette to educational institutions, to the middle schools, to the high schools, that can somehow be presented, that can be vetted by the educators and that sort of thing, to give them some view. And as we all know, occupations are changing at a breakneck speed. What was the employment 10 years ago may not exist now, or it's totally different. So obviously it would be good to give them an idea of what possibilities could be out there, or what they might be looking at going forward, because they may not know exactly what a mechanical engineer does, or a lot of very finite, small niches for employment that could very well be STEM related. So.
There's there are two groups. One is called Skype a Scientist, and teachers at all different grade levels from kindergarten through high school can actually go on the webpage for Skype a Scientist and request to hear from a scientist from whatever background they're interested in. They can request a male, a woman, an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. They're able to really cater to their students and what they're looking for. And then there's also an organization called 500 Women Scientists, where you can request to have a female scientist speak.
Excellent. Can you share, or are you aware, Ashley, of any links for those?
Yep. I actually run, or I guess help with the Buffalo pod for the 500 Women Scientists, so I can send that out. And then the Skype a Scientist, I can send that link out as well.
Okay. And I've been posting some links and things on Twitter and using the hashtag STEMStudentsThrive. Thanks for sharing those. I don't think I've heard of either of those, and they look super interesting.
Me either. Excellent.
So as a part of our work with the State Education Department, we're also providing a hub for resource. It's called netprogram.org, where we are targeting faculty and staff mainly, but also potential students who might become gender non-traditional students, and specifically in the context of community colleges. But a part of the website is also devoted to hosting the videos of the interviews that we are having for the Vanguard awardees. So every year there are 8 of them. We interview them professionally and edit them using their pictures as they're doing their work with their professors, and then they're answering a lot of the questions, the gist of which we have shared with you. And we're encouraging the community colleges to use these free resources to recruit new students and or spread them around. So such resources are also available on our website. All these granted that this is gender non-traditional students and women in STEM is a part of our target group, but it's a large portion. So you might also find some of these videos quite impressive. And we'll share the link with you as well.
Thank you. That was a great Q&A session. Does anyone else have any comments or questions or anything they would like to add before we wrap up? All right. Well, so I would just really like to thank our participants today, and thank you so much, Ashley, for sharing your story. I think it's stories like that that are going to move the needle, I think, as much as anything. And we did record this, so we will share the recording and the PowerPoint slides through the listserv. Is that right, Becky?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And if anyone registered, we can send that out to them too.
Okay, great. And then our next session will be November 13th.
20th.
Oh, that's right, we changed the date, November 20th. And in that session, we will be talking about supporting women in who are pursuing alternative learning models, and that might include things like MOOCs or certificates or boot camps. So please spread the word, and we will talk with you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.